The latest report put out by the International Monetary Fund talks about the global economy slowing down. To understand how big and bright a spark India remains at a time when the world's wheels are slowing down. Joining us now, the newly minted chief economist of the IMF, Gita Gopinath. Welcome.
Thank you.
First and foremost, we're delighted that you have the position that you do, and I think there are lots of Indians who are watching and cheering and waving and saying, well done.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be in this position.
So, Gita, let's start with the report that you put out at the World Economic Forum, which talks about the speed of growth of the global economy coming down. How big a concern is this from the perspective of global growth? Do you see this continue? Could we be potentially in a couple of years from now heading into a real slowdown?
So our outlook is that growth is slowing, but at this point it's modest. So we are not staring at a recession at this point. We've reduced it by about 0.2 percentage points for the world economy this year and about 0.1 for next year. The problem, of course, is that there are many risks that are there and they're growing. And those risks on the trade side, on financial conditions, have the possibility of making this much worse than what we expect at this point.
You're also saying that the Indian economy is likely to grow faster than China by 1 percentage point. You're projecting that China is coming to the slowest rate of growth in 28 years. Yet we spoke to Christine Lagarde at the IMF and she said India could do much better, and given all the indigenous factors, it's not doing as well as it should.
Okay, so we have to put this in context. So the fact that China is slowing is a reflection of the level of maturity of its economy. It was growing at 9-10% rates for a 20-year period, and then after that it started slowing down. So India is earlier in the cycle of growth, and it's at about 7.5% at this point. What the managing director Lagarde was flagging was that is a good number from a global context. That's a very good, healthy growth rate. But given the level of development India is at, there is a potential for it to grow at a higher rate of about 8-9%.
From where you are at, what more would you like to see this current government or the next Indian government do when it comes to economic reform measures to be able to increase our rate of growth by, say, 100, 200 basis points?
One of the things we have to do is job creation. I don't think we've been very successful at creating jobs, even at the 7.5% growth rate that we have. We need to, if we want to get to the higher rates of 9%, firms should be able to operate at much bigger scales than they are doing right now. But that's going to require some pretty serious reforms on the land and labor side for India. I think without that it would be a little hard.
But the government tried, for example, changing the land acquisition law, and there's a huge political backlash, and then the government panicked. How do you see any government in the future be able to touch these hot button issues of land and labor?
There are some creative ways of doing this, and like in the report that I had with Rahul and others, we talked about certain forms through which you could do the reforms on the land and on the labor side. I understand that these are thorny, sensitive issues, but they can't be put on the back burner.
Okay, you spoke about not creating adequate jobs. Now that's a vexed question in India. The government is holding back labor ministry data, saying it doesn't adequately reflect job creation. The argument from Piyush Goyal and the others is that if the economy is growing at 7.5%, you have to be silly to assume that it's not creating jobs. Naturally, jobs are being created, but because data is measured in a very traditional way, it doesn't account for the number of jobs being created. How do you look at this issue around and the debate around job creation?
It would be fair to say that we certainly need better numbers on job creation. We don't really have a very careful measurement of it, so there is certainly the sense that maybe this is not being well measured. But I don't think that's the case. And why is that? It's because if you look at, for instance, whenever there's an announcement of a job in the railways, if you see the large number of people who apply for it, this tells you that there is this huge supply of labor that is looking for like 10 jobs. And that confirms the view that there's not enough job creation happening.
You also spoke of how no sensible macroeconomist would think of demonetization as being a sensible measure. Do you believe all the effects of demonetization are now in the past?
So we studied this carefully just recently. Whenever you make a prognosis of this kind, you have to make sure you have all the variables you care about. So we looked at employment, we looked at credit growth, and light-based activity. And using those measures, it points to the fact that most of the effect was front-loaded. It was very early on. But by around mid-2017, the effects died off. Now, that said, there could be other variables that we haven't been able to study that might have better, and some of those could be positive too on tax collection. And we haven't had the data for that just yet.
Finally, you've called Raghuram Rajan a mentor. You said you've looked up to him. You're in some senses following in his footsteps. You've become chief economist of the IMF. So does the Reserve Bank of India beckon next?
You do know that Raghu and I are not twins. So there is no reason our careers should mimic each other's. I mean, he's been doing great, and I hope to continue doing what I'm doing.
Thank you so much, Gita Gopinath, for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you.